A meeting by a high-ranking Indian diplomat has ended with high hopes for likely to be unfulfilled. Indian National Security Advisor AJIT DOVAL arrived in Beijing on Wednesday for the 7th BRICS security talks involving Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Well, he has been the highest-level Indian official visiting Beijing since the beginning of the China-Indian border standoff on June the 18th. The special representative on the border mechanism had been expected to pull his country out of the impasse by talking to the Chinese State Councilor Yang Jiechi on the sidelines of the security talks. As for the official program, DOVAL also called on Chinese President Xi Jinping along with fellow top security officials of the BRIC nations. In a brief comment on the Yang-DOVAL meeting, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said Yang elaborated China's position on bilateral issues and major problems. But before DOVAL's visit, Beijing reiterated that no meaningful dialogue would be held with India until it unconditionally withdrew troops from Chinese soil. New Delhi, however, has suggested mutual concessions as the precondition for peace talks. Given Beijing's strong stance, what can DOVAL take back to the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi? And how could Beijing and New Delhi deal with the stalemate ahead of the BRICS summit, which will be held in just a month? Joining me here in New Delhi is Ashok Kumar Mehta, a former Major General in the Indian Army. Mehta is now an independent security analyst, and in Beijing, Senior Colonel Zhou Bo, Director of the Center for Security Cooperation of the Office of International Military Cooperation at the Chinese Ministry of National Defense. Let me with you, Senior Colonel Zhou. Indian National Security Advisor DOVAL has already wrapped up his meeting here in Beijing, but leaving no evidence that Beijing could give the nod for mutual concessions. And what exactly by mutual concessions? The expectations were running high, but it seems there is no agreement on how to solve this dispute.
Well, exactly. I'm not sure what actually Mr. Wang actually has talked with Mr. Yang Jiechi, but I can assure you that there is no compromise on Chinese position simply because this happened totally on Chinese territory, so there is no room for China to make a compromise. The Indian's position, as I understand it, is try to ask the two sides to withdraw so as to save its own face. So right now, all the different government officials, military senior officers have changed the tones. Actually, they're toning down a bit, but the bottom line is this is on Chinese territory and we have no room to make such a compromise.
So, Mr. Mehta, China stands firm on this position. Do you think Mr. DOVAL, what will he say to Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi when he came back to New Delhi?
Well, I suspect he will say what the Chinese official position has been throughout, which is that there will be talks only after Indian troops have withdrawn unconditionally. Now, tying down this standoff with conditionalities makes it extremely difficult for mutual concessions, because the Chinese position, as I have just heard, is that Indian troops intruded into what he refers to Doklam as Chinese territory. Well, that is not the Indian position, and that is also not the Bhutanese position. The Bhutanese had issued a démarche on the 20th of June about this, and they repeated the issue on 29th of June. By the way, the incident, according to the Indian side, took place on 16th June and not 18th June as you have stated. The Indian troops entered Bhutanese territory on request of the Bhutanese, with whom India has a security arrangement. So that part must be clear. Now, I am very familiar with Chinese conditionalities, because I think the Chinese have a saying that those who tie the knot first must to untie it.
Then who do you
And
think
I
tied the
recall
knot first?
In 19, no, I will, you see, this is it. Who tied the knot first? The fact that PLA construction units entered a disputed territory which has been recognized, disputed with Bhutan of agreements of 1988 and 1998.
But the question
That
is, China
territory
China
is one
doesn't
part
think
of
this
it,
is
local
disputed
plan.
area. China has control over the areas and is
Well-
making constructions on its own territory. At
Well,
least this
this
is
is-
what the Chinese understands how things are going.
Well, General, could I comment on what you have said?
Yes,
Well,
Colonel
this
Zhao.
is-
Yes, you have mentioned that the Indian troops were sent in at the request of Bhutanese government. This is wrong because so far we have read nothing like that to show that the Bhutanese government has actually invited the Indian government to step in. Could you show any evidence that the Indian troops were invited at all? Because according to the treaty between you and the Bhutanese government in 2007, yes, it obliges two parties to consult each other when it comes to issues of national interest. But this is not a situation that Indians' national interests were violated. There is a kind of dispute between Bhutan and China, but not on Dongkram area.
Let alone the question whether Bhutan is appropriate to invite Indian troops to its territory to solve a dispute with another country.
We have, yes, this is the first time that a confrontation between the PLA and Indian troops has taken place on the soil of a third country. Absolutely right. But it is also absolutely right that the Indians and Bhutanese, not just 2007, we have long-standing treaty arrangements for defense and security.
That
We have
shows
training
exactly
teams
that-
inside Bhutan.
And the treaty in 1949
Yes, that's
shows
a fact.
exactly
It's-
how you actually have
and-
controlled Bhutan, because in the treaty, the Bhutan has to agree that India should guide its external relations. So how can a sovereign state be guided its
Well-
foreign relations for over half a century? This is not the international norm of modern
No,
times.
no, no.
And this is
Colonel-
why you have to change
Colonel-
it in 2007.
Colonel,
Am I right?
no. We changed it. Yes, Bhutan will be guided by India. They will consult each other on national interest. But what is unstated is the security arrangement. Our defense minister, you will recall, that about 3 weeks ago, when Chinese commentators were threatening India with a repeat of 1962, the Indian defense minister said two things. First, he said 2017 is not
Is not
1962.
Okay.
And second, he said, we have a treaty arrangement with Bhutan for its
Major
defense
General,
and security.
I want to
And
talk
I have
about a bigger
paper with
picture.
me.
A bigger picture here is the security meeting, BRICS meeting, just wrapped up. It is supposed to pave the way for the BRICS summit in China. Do you think the standoff and the lack of any way to resolve this anytime soon will upend the agenda at BRICS summit in China in September?
Well, you know my own view. I've been writing almost on a weekly basis, and I have said, and I will say it again on CCTV loud and clear, that there is absolutely no reason for India and China to convert their differences into a conflict. We have not had a conflict or a war since 1962. We have the most elaborate border agreements from 1993, 1996, 2003, 2005, 2012, 2013. Nowhere else in the world is the border management as sophisticated and as good as between India and China.
And to make matters,
I seriously believe that there is scope.
And to make matters
I
worse,
seriously believe
there are
there
media
is scope
in both countries that are feeding the frenzy. Indian media has been passionate in their coverage of this scandal,
no,
and some
not
say
in India,
New
not
Delhi
in
has
India.
adopted. Because in the Indian Today magazine, there is a front cover picture showing China and Pakistan together. That map, omitting Tibet and Taiwan, obviously has been very nationalistic.
Well, General, as an officer who have taken charge of South Subcontinent for 10 years, and as a negotiator for the first round of diplomatic and military group, I cannot tell you what you said about all the agreements were there. But this time is totally different in that this is not our misstanding on either side about where the line of actual control lies. It is that you are on Chinese territory. Even if you believe this is Bhutanese territory, who gives you courage to step in between China and Bhutan? Clearly, you deliberately miss the convention between China and the UK. Yeah, all the demarcation.
What I want to know is that what do you think India and China, both the political establishment and the media, should do to tone down the temperature so that both sides can have a cool head for negotiations?
And I can tell you one thing, Chinese media never changes tone, but Indian media start to change its tone from the beginning by arguing that China first invade Indian territory, and then you change the tone. And then you said we destroy a bunker, and your army chief said they didn't. And then you change your tone, so now the trajectory point is Bangla. No, it is not. So you have been changing tones, not Chinese media or not any Chinese government officials.
No. The Chinese media, the think tanks, Xinhua, Global Times, PLA Daily, they have written the most aggressive, the most belligerent stories about threatening India and taking India to war and opening a two-front conflict, teaching India a lesson. I mean, that kind of language has not been used in India by anybody.
Can you be more specific which article on which media has said that?
My second hat I wear is I belong to the media. I retired from the army in 1991 and I am in the media since 1991. I am with TV, I am a columnist, so I study dozens of newspapers and magazines.
But you're saying Chinese media carrying articles saying there might be a war between the two countries.
But
the point is,
but what I am saying now
on Chinese territory
is that there's been a welcome departure when Mr. DOVAL went to Beijing now. For the first time, the Chinese media welcomed him. They were calling him a schemer, a plotter. You know, I mean, that kind of language for the media to use for a national security advisor. So the Chinese media, the last 48 hours, has shown tremendous and commendable restraint.
General, you have been talking too much. This is not the right way of having this conversation. Let me just use a few seconds to say, you are on the Chinese territory, so if you do not want the war, that is fine. So you got to go away from Chinese territory. Do not invite this kind of condition or that atmosphere for what you have described.
That is not Chinese territory. The Bhutanese, if you can see this, the Bhutanese have said loud and clear that this is disputed territory and have asked you that not to disturb the status quo and go
Bhutan
back to March 19.
Entered into 24 rounds of negotiation.
This is
and
Bhutan.
It has never disputed that Donglang belongs to China. So you, as a third party, will be so
You
bold to
have
enter
offered-
into Chinese territory. So who gives the courage?
So it seems we have never narrowed the differences on
You-
this very controversial issue. Major General, we're running out of time. Thank you very much for your perspective, and also Senior Colonel DOVAL for
all right.
your
But I think there is
insight into this.
there is scope.
It will take much more
There
time
is scope to
solve a
to
problem
untie-
like this. We cannot do it in the 20 minutes here on television. Thank you very much, Major General, and thank you, Senior Colonel DOVAL. And I